I'm Angela Giles, and I am a lead programmer with the Boston Women's Film Fest, and tonight we are going to talk about Farewell Amor.
Hi, I'm Sean Cotter. I am also hanging out and looking forward to talking about Farewell Amor.
So, Sean, what did you think of the film?
I really liked it. I mean, it was a lot different than some of the other films that I've seen in the festival. I liked it sort of like I don't want to say gentleness, but because that's not the right word, but I feel like if a male director made the same film, it would be a completely different film. And I felt like the dynamic of sort of the diaspora that sort of is happening with the father coming to work in America and then his family sort of joining him, 18 years later, 17 years later, was super interesting because you don't necessarily you hear about stories like that all the time, but you actually don't really, I've never really, that's not my experience. So I don't necessarily think about sort of the ramifications about how sort of deal with that sort of reuniting after such a long time. And I feel like that's a story that needs to be told because, I mean, it's happening. Families are getting separated all the time as we move through the globe, and people try to make better lives for themselves. So I thought that was really interesting.
No, I agree with you. And I think that your point about it being not made by a male director, but by a female director is very well taken. And I think it's particularly interesting because the character, we have sympathy for all three members of the family, but the first character that we really meet and see is the father. And I think he's in a bit of a predicament because he's had this long-term relationship with another female that he obviously cares about. And then his wife and daughter are able to join him. So he's had to break off this relationship to make room for his family. And we just get to watch it happen. We're not asked to have any judgment of it. We're not asked to be overly sympathetic with him. So I thought it was really interesting to get a female take on what that might look like. It was really thoughtfully done in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it was so interesting because, I mean, I couldn't even imagine sort of like knowing that you had a whole nother family in another country and then sort of having this deeper, and you can tell that he loved Linda, who's the other woman. You can tell that he loved her because when they interacted after the fact, he looked longingly at her and, kind of sort of dependent on her as well throughout the film for different things. And it was super interesting. And I have to say that one of my favorite things about the film too is sort of the director's handling of her male lead. I mean, you don't often see a woman-directed film handle sort of because it was kind of his story in many ways. It was everyone's story, but he was sort of the lead character. And I just thought, again, I feel like a lot of times men are not portrayed, especially Black men, are not portrayed as sort of emotional or sensitive or nurturing, even though a lot of them are. There's still this sort of portrayal in the media, especially in the mainstream media, of men, especially Black men, of being more violent, more less family oriented, and with different dreams and hopes. And I felt like his character was so nuanced, and it had such a soft, you could feel his pain through a lot of it and his sort of struggle, which I really kind of appreciated.
Right. I agree with you. And I think actually the fact that we got to see both of the women, Linda and his wife, and we got to see their struggles with the situation, and them both coming to grips with the situation separately, I thought was interesting as well, because we weren't asked to vilify or be overly sympathetic with either one of them.
I was
going to like both of them as characters during the film, and I had sympathy for both of them in the situation, but it was just really appropriately done. I felt there was no pulling of emotion out of me. It really was just presenting this complex situation that is, as you had mentioned, far too common with these women who happen to be involved with the same man. And it sounds awful when you say it that way. But, you know, and his choice and how his choice reflected in both of these women was really nicely done as well. I mean, I think the character development in this film was really good. You know, even with the daughter, even with the neighbor,
Yeah.
who she was kind of a foil, maybe providing a little bit of comic relief, a little bit of room to breathe in the film with all these heavy themes, but she was good. It was a good character.
And I think all of the characters, even the DJ, the high school friend of Sylvia, was really interesting too. He's that actor is in Blackish, I think. I think I noticed him from, but I liked his character as well because he wasn't like, he was also not very typified or stereotypical as like a young man either. Like he was a little bit more caring. He was very respectful of elders as well, which is kind of was very interesting to see because when, you know, when Sylvia brings him home, there was a sort of like that sort of,
awkward moment.
Yeah, the awkward moment, you know, and you know, the mother being so very religious, you know, that was sort of like that, you know, and I can understand like growing up as someone who grew up in a fairly religious household, it reminded me of like bringing things home and sort of that feeling that guilt that you actually were having fun. And that was also like the other thing too. It's like the sort of dichotomy of pleasure versus non-pleasure, I guess, would be like the opposite of not like sort of being a little bit more repressed and a little more stoic and stern too, was kind of interesting because, you know, the you know, it was mentioned a lot, especially the him bringing a bottle of wine home, and she's like, no, we don't drink. And then, you know, and I liked also how we kind of also learned about our characters as well through the different sort of like staging that everyone got their own sort of like section.
Yes, that was I wasn't expecting that to be the presentation in the film, that we would get like a version from every character, but it was a wonderful way to present this story. And when I saw that had happened, something clicked in my brain. I was like, yes, this is exactly how you need to tell a story. Because I think part of the challenge in the story is making sure that we're smashing through some stereotypes and tropes, right? Like we talk about immigrants who come and, you know, they find a job by driving a taxi and whatnot, and we don't think much about their lives beyond that. And this did a really wonderful job of showing what this man did, how hard he worked and sacrificed to bring his wife and daughter over. And it just kept going at it and gently like knocking down stereotype after stereotype after stereotype, even the mother's religious zeal. I felt, you know, we were introduced to that in not a heavy-handed way necessarily, but in a way that made us understand that that was part of how she got through the separation when the father had to leave.
And it was great because that was sort of revealed through the daughter. The daughter section too, and I feel like you also got like a sense of his sort of wanting to be a good father to his daughter as well, and that sort of commitment that he's made to them, even though Sylvia the daughter did not see it at all, and she kind of like grew into it. I just thought like it's really interesting because you saw his perspective first, and then you kind of like went back and kind of like saw the different angle from everybody, and I thought that was really good. And I have to agree, I love the fact that the director did not sort of waste any time with confrontation between Linda and his wife. I'm drawing a blank on her name. I want to say Esther?
Sylvia?
No, Sylvia was the daughter. Elise?
Something like that. I'm terrible.
I'm so terrible with names. At least it won't be any spoilers for anyone because we can remember the names.
Exactly. No, well, and the other thing that was really nicely done was the connection between the father and the daughter with dancing. Because on the face of it, if you say like, oh, you know, the daughter and the dad find this connection through dancing, it sounds very obvious and almost heavy-handed. But at the same time, we see what dancing means to the father. We find out what dancing means for the father and the mother. And then obviously dancing is how the daughter starts to find her way in this new world that she's in. And the fact that she felt seen when she was doing that. And it's such a lovely connection. And I feel like ultimately, you know, that's the underpinnings of that relationship with her father. That's where it's going to start from. But it wasn't one of those sort of in your face things where you feel like you just got smacked with something that was very obvious. I mean, it just was handled and eased in on me in such a way that I was like, okay, this is good. This is good. This is working here.
I'm glad that you mentioned the being seen, because as a queer man, a lot of things, like I sometimes you just want to be acknowledged for who you are, and I felt, especially as a teenager, that didn't happen at all. So that sort of line when, you know, the mother goes to her, you know, I see you. That wrecked me because I was like, I want that for my parents. But I feel like that's also very important because also, you know, the media also erases people quite intentionally. And I feel like that the sort of the reaffirmation that you are valid and you are seen and you are being seen is such a good affirmation to have and to continue to put out there, because, you know, it is true that you will be seen. There are a set of eyes that are looking at you.
Right.
And that's important for people to remember. So they don't necessarily feel so invisible and so left behind, really.
Exactly. And it felt real to me. Like it felt like this girl, this is what she's craving, is to be seen and heard for who she is. And even with the struggles with her mom and with her dad, you know, it was that sort of social acknowledgement in this new culture. I think that taught her, okay, everything's going to be okay here. Everything's going to be okay here. And it was a really great moment in the film when that exchange happened between the mother and the daughter, because, you know, we spend a lot of time understanding and experiencing the mother's religious zeal. And, you know, the first time it's brought upon us, we see the dad's reaction, and he's at the dinner table and his eyebrows pop open. And as a viewer, I kind of did the same thing, like, oh boy, where is this character?
Here we go.
Exactly. And it was like this sort of splash, and she maintained that zeal throughout the film. But as we learned more about her character, it became less of a point. You know, it just was part of her, and it wasn't necessarily like a sideshowy thing or a shtick or a gimmick, but it was just part of her. So when to see that meeting between her and her daughter was especially poignant.
I mean, that was also good too, because it sort of unpacked everyone's kind of coping mechanisms for the sort of separation of diaspora. Just because, like, I mean, you know, you got it from the father, you know, with his cab buddy and sort of like them talking about, like, you know, him kind of getting through and stuff like that, and, you know, his life as well. But you also, I mean, you get that from the mother, and yes, you know, she did start out very zealous. My favorite scene is the church. And, you know, the confession plate, the confession plate is long, collection plate, that's what it is, not confession plate. And he puts $1 in, and she's like, you know, the wad of cash out of her wallet. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that became a kind of a big thing, because it's sort of this representation, and it's also kind of a commentary on sort of the predatorial aspect of sort of the religion kind of coming through, and, you know, being all about the Benjamins, we'll say. You know, wanting that sort of way.
Yes, actually. And I thought that was a really interesting I guess, kind of subplot in the film, was how people can kind of fall into that, and what does that mean, and what do those sacrifices for religion versus the sacrifices for family mean, and how do you make those choices? And I thought that, you know, the confrontation between the father and the mother when he discovered how much she had sent back to Angola was really telling of just about their perspectives, because she felt like she was almost doing something for the family in doing that. And the father's view was, I'm working my tail off for the family, and this could have been used for the family. And you're right. It was a very interesting.
I think that she'd never heard that before, to be honest.
I agree with you. I agree.
And I think also that and also with the phone call, and it wasn't necessarily the first phone call with the sister redemption line, cash call, 1-900 cash, God's cash, who when they asked her for more, that she needs to give more because that'll help her troubles. That I feel like you saw in her face this sort of like this light bulb kind of go on, and she had this sort of gestalt kind of moment there, where she's like, oh, husband is right, you know.
Exactly. And I think that was part of her journey, was to come out of the culture that she left behind, that she'd been so ingrained to, that's where she literally paid her devotion.
Yep.
At the same time, the dad had to come out of the American culture, which sort of allowed for him to take another woman in the absence of his wife. And so they kind of had to pull themselves out of where they were most comfortable and meet in the middle, which I guess is how any relationship succeeds.
Yeah.
But in these particular conditions, it's a very challenging thing to do.
No, I have to agree with that too. And also the daughter, you know, had her own, it was all about sort of expectations and sort of the sort of thrashing of expectations, and sort of like kind of trying to rebuild something new. I thought it was also really interesting too, that she, you know, was wandering the streets after sort of kind of like, you know, the ultimate sort of confirmation of the other woman. And she's wandering the streets, and she's like, you know, I'm lost, I can't take this anymore. And she ends up at a church, but then she can't get in.
Yeah.
She's locked out, which I thought was super interesting. I was just like, wow, there's a lot there. I mean, it's a quiet film, but there's a lot that's beneath the surface, which is really, which I think is really interesting.
Well, and I think along those lines, you know, when the daughter's doing her dancing, and the father leaves from watching her to go find the mom, and she truly is seen by everyone but her dad. She's seen by her peers. And meanwhile, I think at that moment, the mom and dad are actually seeing each other for the first time. You know, and the mother asks, like, what do we do now? And we don't hear what he says to her.
Yes.
Which I was waiting. I wanted to know what he said. Like, did he say we focus on our daughter, or we focus on us, or we figure out how to get divorced, or whatever? Like, we don't know what he said to her in that moment. But at the same time, and we, you know, we see the family with such ease, and the way the film ended, you know, I don't know that we're necessarily ever going to know, but at the same time, it was a very satisfying ending as a viewer, because it wasn't all packaged up. This isn't a tidy story, and it didn't start from a tidy place. It came out of a place of war and disruption, and it didn't end in a tidy place. And that's, frankly, you know, that's life.
But what was kind of really hopeful about it didn't end in war and disruption where it could have. I mean, there was a lot of narrative threads there that could have, even though they didn't get tied up, they could have exploded out, and everything could have imploded. But I feel like there's the other thing that really kind of struck me with the film. There's so much strength in all three characters. Just the strength of the strength to survive and the strength to persist. And I feel like that just kind of coming in our current climate right now is such a message of hope and sort of something to strive for, is that, you know, we will persist.
I agree. And I think there was also a message about, you know, asking the hard questions, whether it's, can I stay in this marriage? Do I want to live in this house with my parents? Do I want to stay with my husband who had this experience with this other female? You know, the strength to ask the questions and bear what the answers are, I think, is everything here. And I think you're right, you know, particularly in this particular crazy time we're in, you know, there comes a point where it's like you can't take anymore. You can't take any more of the phone buzzing with a headline, or turning on the news, or hearing about, you know, a rise in whatever. But you need to still like keep getting up and facing what the facts are, and just moving forward and figuring out ways that you're going to move forward and what that's going to look like for you. And I think you're right, that is what the message of hope is about this film. I'm curious about the title though. Farewell Amor set me up with a bunch of preconceived notions about how the film would end, or what was going to happen in the film. And I was looking for conflict in places where it never came, thankfully, because I think it would have tainted the film. The title itself is really curious to me. What do you make of it?
I mean, I kind of think it fit, because it sort of said goodbye to those expectations of love and what love means, and sort of like all our sort of like fantasies that are sort of painted by the culture, by society, by, you know, religion, by expectation. And it just says goodbye to all of that. And it's about sort of like moving through that, unpacking it, picking out what's good and what's important, and kind of moving forward into the future. And I felt like that the film sort of had this sort of like trajectory where it sort of just, it just kept moving, and it didn't allow you to get mired in what could be really like heavy sort of topics.
Right.
Anyways, I mean, you know, everything was sort of mentioned, and like everything had a sort of like a lightness, and a sort of like a, you know, like breathing room to sort of like
yeah.
So it wasn't really like a hard goodbye. It was more like an adieu to everything that came before it.
No, it's almost like they had to say goodbye to what their idea of love was. Or, you know, because I think 17 years is a long time to be separated, and
yeah,
we have a tendency to reinterpret things, or perhaps misremember things from our past. And I think romanticizing the idea of the husband who left to start a new life for you and is sending for you, you know, that's a heavy load to put on him. And likewise, I think the husband with the wife coming and remembering like how she was, and maybe not completely remembering all the culture and how much religion played a part in the culture, that's also a heavy load to place on the other person. So I think that, you know, I think you're right. I think it really was saying goodbye to sort of ideas of things. And, you know, the only character I feel like who didn't have these grandiose expectations, with the exception of maybe what it was like to move to New York, was the daughter. You know, she literally was meeting a man that she really didn't have much of a memory of, and he didn't know what to do with her because he gave her a little teddy bear.
Right.
It was an incredibly awkward moment when I saw what was in the red bag. And I don't know. I like that, Sean. I like it.
Yeah, I think also the goodbye, the farewell. Also, I mean, it's her former life. I mean, it's hard being a teen and being in a place for so long, and then having, you know, making friends and stuff like that, and then being just uprooted, and that sort of expectation of what the new chapter is going to be. Because I mean, you know, all her friends think that, you know, that she's going to be hanging out with Beyonce and like meeting stars and celebrities and all this kind of stuff. And I'm sure she had a little bit of that in her mind as well when she was coming, because, you know, this is how America is sort of painted abroad. Well, at least it used to be. I don't think it is anymore. Damn you. But you know, I think that like it's I think the farewell was to a lot of the expectations that sort of were sort of kind of posited at the beginning of that when they met at the airport. It's a completely fascinating film. I'm so
No, I agree. You know, and I know that this film was at Sundance, and I can completely understand why. I mean, it's hitting on a lot of current things, you know, immigration, the diaspora, the various diasporas that we're seeing happening right now. And it's a film that I hope people can make the time to see, because I feel like seeing a lot of this through the steady gaze of a female director made all the difference in telling the story.
And also a Black female director that's not necessarily African American either. And I think that's also very important too, because, you know, a lot of times, at least Black culture deals a lot with African American, whereas, you know, there are Black people around the world. And I feel like that's those perspectives, especially African has a huge like film industry. And I was like, I am looking forward to sort of like a cultural sort of revolution, and sort of like this sort of like a, you know, golden age of sort of African cinema.
Yes.
Like I you know, I crave that. I'm like, as a cinephile, I welcome, like, you know, more international cinema coming our way. And it's great that, like, you know, Boston Women's Film Festival is sort of kind of putting their finger on the pulse of that.
Well, we try.
Right. So it's almost 9. Any maybe last thoughts?
I think, you know, I think this film is, on the face of it, a pretty straightforward film. It's one that I'm actually glad that we programmed. I think our program this year is very diverse. It spans a range of emotions and experiences and stories, and I think this is solidly in there with you know, a female director taking on the story of a male who's struggling with his relationships with his wife and daughter. And I find it fascinating that she did so effortlessly. And it just, I think it made all the difference here. And I really hope that people can take a look at it, because it's well worth their time.
Is it her first film, do you know? Or
I don't know.
I want to do some research now, because I want to see more of her work, because I think she has a really gorgeous sensibility.
She does. I'm curious to see sort of as well, like just what subjects she's tackled or what she's currently got underway, because she does have a really nice touch. It's not heavy-handed at all, but at the same time, it's so nuanced.
Yeah, I mean, she's, you know, she's almost like it's very painterly in many ways. Sort of, she's definitely setting the scene.
Yeah,
which is really kind of nice.
I agree.
We need more of it.
I agree.
So, you want to talk us out?
Well, thanks for joining us. I hope that you've enjoyed hearing us talk about Farewell Amor, and I hope that if you've not seen the film, that you'll see the film, and that you'll continue to explore looking at different films that we're offering here during the Film Fest. We've got different ticket packs available. And, you know, you can always contact the festival by email or on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram if you've got questions about what we're doing. But thanks for sticking with us.
Awesome. Thank you. Angela, thanks for joining me and inviting me to chat with you. This has been a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure chatting with you, Sean.
And Farewell Amor is running till the 18th, as all of the films in the Boston Women's Film Festival. Go to BWFF 2020.eventive.org for the full schedule. And please see some more movies. And have a good night.
Good night.